Hello, everybody. This is Pastor Troy again this morning, and I wanted to talk to you today about aging. I want to talk about the progression, I guess, of events, and all I can do is just share my own personal testimony about, how I've aged. And I'm not old yet, but I'm not 20 either, so I feel like I have at least some perspective on life and development. So I want to go back to my early childhood and talk about some things I struggled with as a child. I would say by the time I was, able to go to school at 5 years old, kindergarten and whatnot, from kindergarten till about third or fourth grade, I was a very, I don't know how you would describe it, I was very ornery. Of course, you'd say, well, that's typical of all children. Yeah, but I was maybe in some ways extra ornery. I guess I was pretty hard to deal with. A lot of the teachers that I had were really had their hands full with me. I was very good at home. My parents were actually shocked when the teachers would call and say, hey, your son, is acting up in class, and he's having a hard time getting along with other students. So that was a real shock to my parents, and my grandparents couldn't believe it because I was like a model child to them at home. But at school, I was different, and they called a psychologist in when I was, I think about, I don't know, I was probably second or third grade, and I was tested, and they run me through all kinds of tests, and the psychologist ended up telling my parents and the school administration and the teachers that they couldn't really find anything wrong with me psychologically. What they did discover was that I was probably maybe a little more advanced intelligently than most of the other students, and they felt like the reason I acted out was because I was bored in class and I wasn't really enjoying it. So I was just trying to find something to occupy my mind, and sometimes that was just mischievousness. So, I was kind of, so they began to, do extra things with me to try to give my mind something to work with, and I began to tone down a little bit after that. So I was not a really what you call a model child, not in school. I was at home, but not in school. So I'm not here to tell you how wonderful I was or anything like that. I'm just telling you this is how it was for me. That was a very difficult time. When I began to get a little older and begin to edge my way toward puberty, I began to calm down quite a bit. And it seemed like that is when I began to really take on a lot of my introverted characteristics, and I began to really become more withdrawn, less outgoing, and less of a problem, of course, to handle for the teachers. I just become more withdrawn into my own little world, began to sit back in class and do my own thing. I didn't bother much of anybody. And so I began to kind of, withdraw. Well, I went through that phase probably up until my mid to late teen years. And then when I began to enter the workforce at 16, I had to learn really quick. You've got to get over being so shy. You've got to learn how to deal with people. So I began to open up a little bit more. I took a job in my late teens as a pizza delivery driver, and that really brought me more out of my shell because I had to knock on people's doors, hand them a pizza, take their money, smile and be friendly, and do that all over town all day long for day after day. So when I got to doing that, I began to develop more extroverted qualities and begin to learn how to blend in with society, I guess you would say, and not be so withdrawn inwardly. So that helped some of my introverted, withdrawn qualities. It helped me to bring me out. So I went through that phase where I became, in my late teens, early 20s, I become fairly extroverted. I've become very more outgoing, and those, like I said, those kind of jobs helped me to gain that aspect of my personality. Of course, after it was, I guess, in my early 20s, I started thinking about marriage, settling down, finding a wife, making a family, which I did. And of course, in my late teens and early 20s, I did a lot of traveling. I traveled all over the United States. I was an evangelist. I traveled from church to church, and I traveled all over the country, all over the Midwest, East, and some out West. So I had a lot of experience with meeting a lot of different people, thousands of people, all across the country. Preached to many, many people, all different size congregations, all different kinds of faiths. I wasn't primarily just, with one particular denomination. I preached from many different denominations. So I got to experience a flavor in a lot of various churches across the country, and I enjoyed it. I really did. In fact, I loved that time. And it was, which I didn't mind traveling the roads by myself. I was young and dumb. And so I traveled a lot by myself. So I got to meet a lot of people one-on-one. I got to meet a lot of families. Got to stay with a lot of people in their homes and to eat a lot of different foods. So it was a great time in my life, and I enjoyed that so much. And when I began to, get my eyes on getting married and try to settle down, and I met my wife. She did not like traveling at all. That was not her thing. She didn't mind if I did it, but she said, "Don't ask me to come along. You go, you do what you want to do, but I'm not a traveler." And so I began to kind of, try to tone that down. And I traveled a little bit after I got married, but not as much. So then I began to go right back into my shell again, began to be more withdrawn. I spent more time at home, more time with my wife. I worked with my father in construction for a number of years till I hurt my back. And then I began to pastor a church. Then I got into pastoring when I was about 26, 27, somewhere in there. I began to pastor a church. And I've been, on and off pretty well ever since, pastoring churches across the country. And that brings out a little bit of the extroverted side of me, but also keeps me somewhat introverted because I don't have to be outward all the time. I do, of course, on Sundays and Wednesday nights, but I don't have to have that ongoing thing like I was when I was evangelizing. It seemed like I was always going and going and going, eating out with this one, that one, and somebody else, somebody calling, come to our home, come and visit us, come and pray with us. I was always on the road somewhere. So that began to kind of slow down a lot for me. So I began to become more withdrawn again. Behavior-wise, that period of time, by the time I'm from kindergarten to about third grade, that I quickly outgrew that, and that was a terrible time in my life. I guess I was just really discombobulated. School was just not. I'll be honest with you, I hated school. I never enjoyed school. School was something I looked forward to getting out of. Now, my daddy is an extrovert. He's an ESFJ. And he would always tell me, "Son, those are going to be the best years of your life. You're going to look back on that, and you're going to miss those years and all that." Well, that's easy for him to say. He's an extrovert. He loved being around the crowd. He loved being around the kids, and he loved all the noise and all that stuff. I hated all that. So, and I've never looked back. I mean, he has, and of course, he misses that. But I've never looked back and said, "Oh, I miss high school. I really miss all that garbage that went on." No, I've never missed it. Never missed it. Never missed grade school. I don't miss none of the teachers. I don't miss any of that. I'm glad that chapter of my life is over. Hallelujah. Okay, enough of that. So, here I am entering into my later 20s, pastoring. I went through a time there. I wasn't like this in my early 20s, but I became very idealistic. I mean, very much so, which I've always had, a drive to do things right, do things perfect if I can get by with it. But I really got very critical-minded in my late 20s and all through most of my 30s, up until my late 30s. I was very critical, very cynical. It was hard to deal with. I had such high expectations for people, for the church, for my family, for my children. They were probably, I really expected a lot. I really expected a lot. I demanded a lot. I demanded a lot out of other churches. I was in pursuits of the perfect church. Of course, it doesn't exist. It's not out there. If you're looking for that in order to serve God, you're never going to find it, so you might as well just go ahead and forget Christianity altogether. Never found the perfect church, but I looked for it. I looked hard. In my late 20s, early 30s, I was on a hunt for the perfect church. And I wanted not only to attend that church, I wanted to pastor that church. And I wanted to believe that it didn't exist. You know, I was probably more linear-minded then. I was more black and white in my thinking. Some would almost argue that I was more narcissistic at that time. And although I was never narcissistic in the way that you'd say I was selfish. I was always a giver, and I love to give. I still love to give. I love to help people, and I love people. I have genuine love in my heart. I'm not a selfish, greedy, motivated person, you know, by selfish motives or anything like that. But there were things about me that were probably toxic when it come to perfection. I mean, I thought that, you know, everything had to be perfect or I was going to be lost. You know, I would not make it to heaven. I would be, you know, doomed. And I wanted my family to be in a perfect environment so they could be raised as perfect Christians. And I wanted everything to be just so perfect and so nice. And I actually ended up being surrounded at times by toxic people, by very narcissistic people that mirrored that back to me, that idealism. I did a video about how idealism can, you know, attract narcissists in our life. I dealt with that, and I went through that. That phase in my life began to knock a lot of burrs off of me, a lot of these spiritual cockaburs that were hanging on me. I was more abrasive then. I was more caustic in how I dealt with people, and I would just tell you like it was. And I grew up in Illinois, which is, you know, farther north than where I am now, and some people would look at me and say, "Oh, Brother Troy's having an Illinois moment," because Yankees don't care how they talk to people. Well, some do, you know, but so a lot of the people I was raised with were just very caustic how they talked. They were just abrasive. But the older I get, the more I realize, you know, this is ridiculous, and reality began to set in. Begin to realize, you know, I've got to learn how to live with imperfection and live with things that I don't agree with. Doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but I have to learn how to harmonize with them. So that became more the side of me that wants to harmonize rather than criticize began to develop in my late 30s. And here I am in my 40s, and I've really toned down a lot. I mean, I'm really more mellow. And I find the older I get, the more mellow I become with my perfectionism. So at 48, I'm far less perfectionistic. And I'm learning to let things just kind of, I'm learning to pick my battles, so to speak. I've learned, you know, what's worth fighting for, what ain't worth fighting for. And some of the things I used to fight for, I look back now, and I think that was ridiculous. You know, I was really fighting for things that were really trivial, really petty. Some would say, "Oh, he's compromised." No, I'm not compromised. I don't want to fight. I don't know if you understand that. I just don't, the drive to fight for some things just isn't there. Now, I mentioned in another video about my core. Now, I still have a core of things that are very precious to me, and I will fight for those things, and I'm not going to let those go. I'll die for those things. But when it comes to some of these non-essential things, and you know, there have become more and more things as I get older that I've begun to relegate into the non-essential category, and so I think that's helped me to temper myself down, and I've become a lot more healthy INFJ as a result. I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. And so these videos kind of help me to bring out some of my flaws, my faults, who I am, and how I've evolved over the last 48 years. And so I'd like to hear from some of you. How have you evolved, you know, in your progress? Some of you maybe are still in your earlier years where you're very, very... I can remember as a youngin', or, you know, back in my 20s, I call myself a youngin', thinking, will I ever grow out of this, you know? And I looked at older people and I thought, they're just too weak. they're too mushy, they're too, they need to take a stand, blah, blah, and now that I'm getting older, I realize why they were that way. They were more let's just try to get along, let's try to blend ourselves, let's not try to rock the boat, so to speak. They were more along those lines, and I never could understand why. But anyway, now I understand. So how is age, how have some of you INFJs aged? If you're older, share with me. If you're younger, share with me where you are right now. What are you dealing with? Because I know idealism really affected me adversely in a lot of ways in my younger years, and I hurt people I wish I had never hurt. I really feel terrible about some of the things I've said and done, and I tried even, at the time when I hurt them and I realized I hurt them, I had to, apologize, and I would bend over backwards trying to apologize. My NITI loop would go crazy, and I'd think, why did I say that? Why did I do that? I wish I had done that different, blah, blah, blah. But, that idealism just would come out, and even now I have to deal with that some. And it's still there, but not to the degree that it was back in the day. So how has age affected some of you? I'd like to hear from you. Anyway, I'm not going to linger long. My video is getting a little lengthy. We'll talk to you later. God bless you.